once worked at a small motel in London, not the fancy kind tourists visit, just a simple place where weary travelers stop for a night's rest. My job was pretty straightforward. Check guests in and out, clean rooms, handle complaints, and make sure nothing strange occurred. Most nights were quiet, passing slowly as I sat behind the front desk, reading magazines and sipping cold coffee to stay awake. One night stands out clearly in my memory. It was late November, and outside, London was wrapped in a misty, cold drizzle. The lobby was dim and still, the old heater humming softly, fighting off the chill sneaking in through gaps near the door. The place felt lonelier than usual, but nothing hinted at the chaos coming. It was just after 10 p.m. when the lobby door creaked open, ringing the rusty bell that always startled me. I looked up from my magazine and saw a man standing there. He was average height, his hair messy and greasy, sticking out in odd directions. Dark circles lay beneath his eyes. His clothes looked unwashed, like he'd been sleeping outside for days. He glanced around nervously before coming to the desk. I felt uneasy, but reminded myself it wasn't uncommon to see troubled people here. I handed him a room key after he quietly paid cash, mumbling something I couldn't understand. Watching him shuffle down the hallway, I hoped he'd go straight to sleep, and that would be the end of it. For about an hour, things were calm. I tidied the lobby and tried to relax again, but shortly after midnight, strange sounds began. From the corridor came the scrape of furniture moving, muffled voices. Curious and a bit annoyed, I left the desk to check it out. The hallway was quiet, and when I listened outside his door, I heard nothing. I shook my head, thinking fatigue was playing tricks, and headed back to the lobby. Just as I settled into my chair, the sound returned, louder and more violent. A door slammed hard, echoing down the hall. Heart pounding, I stood up again and rushed toward the noise. Before I reached the man's room, the door swung open, startling me. There he was, in the dim hallway, eyes wide, breathing hard. He pushed past me without a word and entered another empty room. Confused and concerned, I followed carefully, trying to stay calm. Inside, I found him by the bed, muttering incoherently. He grabbed the mattress, flipped it off the frame, and ripped at the sheets frantically, as if searching desperately for something hidden. I tried to reason with him, asking him to stop, but my words didn't reach him. He kept wrecking the room, tossing pillows, lamps, and bedside tables aside. Feeling helpless, I realized I needed help. Before I could reach the phone, footsteps echoed down the hall. My friend Jack, who often stopped by during his late-night security patrols nearby. Jack was tall and solidly built, always calm, even under pressure. Relief washed over me when he stepped inside. Without hesitation, Jack tried to calm the stranger, approaching slowly and carefully. But the man didn't calm down. He lashed out, fists flying, eyes wild with rage. Jack was ready, but the fight was violent and chaotic, the small room feeling even smaller as they wrestled against walls and furniture. I stood frozen, heart racing in panic, not sure what to do. Then Jack, breathing hard, managed to pin the man to the carpeted floor. He yelled at me urgently, "Call the police now." My hand shaking, I grabbed the bedside phone and dialed as fast as I could. The dispatcher stayed calm, asking questions while Jack held the man down. It felt like forever, but soon I heard sirens outside, breaking the quiet night. The police burst in quickly, taking control. 2 officers lifted the stranger off the floor and handcuffed him. He fought violently, screaming and thrashing until they escorted him out. With him gone, the room felt eerily quiet, messy and broken, a stark reminder of the chaos. The rest of the night was a blur of police questioning and reports. Jack sat quietly beside me as we repeated what happened. Several guests, disturbed by the noise, also gave statements. It turned out the man had similar incidents before, driven by personal troubles and substance abuse. Knowing the truth didn't ease my anxiety about that night. Afterward, I sat again in the lobby, the heater humming like nothing happened. Dawn came slowly, the mist outside thinning as daylight appeared. My shift ended quietly, and as I walked home, exhaustion weighed me down, I realized how vulnerable we feel, even in familiar places. Though I stayed working at the motel, every late shift brought quiet dread. Every time the lobby door creaked open, my heart jumped nervously. That strange man's desperate eyes haunted my memory, a reminder of how quickly a normal night can become terrifying. A few years ago, when I was in high school, my history class took a trip to Belgium. We were all GCSE students, excited for the adventure ahead. But little did we know, this trip would turn out to be one we'd never forget, for all the wrong reasons. The tires of our old charter bus crunched over gravel as we pulled into the overgrown driveway of Le Relais Ubly, the Forgotten Inn. The name alone should have been our first warning. I pressed my forehead against the fogged window, watching the skeletal outline of the inn emerge from the evening mist. The three-story structure sagged under the weight of its own history, its gray stone facade pockmarked with age. Leafless vines clung to the walls like skeletal fingers, and the few remaining shutters hung at unnatural angles, creaking in the wind. "Welcome to your home for the next 2 nights," Ms. Delacroix announced with forced cheer. The exhaustion in her voice betrayed her. We'd been stranded here after our bus broke down halfway to our intended hotel in Lyon. The tow truck driver had muttered something about no mechanics until morning, before abandoning us at this relic from another century. As we filed off the bus, the air tasted metallic, like old coins. A sign above the entrance swung on rusted chains, its faded letters barely legible. The oak door groaned as the innkeeper, a gaunt man with yellowed nails and hollow cheeks, ushered us inside. His name, he said, was Monsieur Lefebvre, though the way he avoided eye contact made me doubt this was true. The lobby smelled of mothballs and something earthier beneath, wet soil and rotting wood. A grandfather clock in the corner had stopped at 3:17, its pendulum frozen mid-swing. "You'll be in the East Wing," Lefebvre rasped, sliding 6 tarnished keys across the desk. "3rd floor." His knuckles cracked as he pointed up the main staircase. "Dinner at 7, breakfast at 8, and whatever you do." His milky eye twitched. "Do not open the cellar door." A nervous laugh bubbled up among my classmates. Jake, always the joker, mime turning a doorknob and recoiling in mock horror. But when Lefebvre didn't smile, the laughter died. The climb to our floor felt endless. Each step groaned under our weight, the banisters sticky with decades of grime. Halfway up, I noticed the wallpaper peeling away to reveal older layers beneath, floral patterns giving way to blood-red damask, then finally to what looked like hand-painted symbols I didn't recognize. Our room stretched the length of the attic, its slanted ceilings trapping the scent of mildew. Twin rows of iron-framed beds stood like sentinels beneath cobweb beams. The only light came from 2 flickering sconces that cast jumpy shadows across the peeling wallpaper. I claimed the bed nearest the door, not out of bravery, but because its mattress looked marginally less stained. As I dropped my backpack, the floorboard beneath me let out a wet squelch. When I lifted my foot, it had stayed slightly depressed, as if something beneath had given way. "Check this out," whispered Priya, running her finger along the headboard of her bed. The wood was carved with initials and dates stretching back to the 1920s. Some were crossed out violently. We were still unpacking when the first thump came from below, a heavy, wet sound that traveled up through the floorboards. Then another, and another, rhythmic, deliberate. The dining room could have been beautiful once. Now the crystal chandelier hung dark, its prisms veiled in spiderwebs. We ate by candlelight, our plates filled with a stew that tasted vaguely of iron. Lefebvre served us in silence, his footsteps making no sound on the creaky floorboards. Between courses, I noticed the portraits lining the walls, generations of severe-looking men and women, their eyes seeming to track our movements. The newest frame held only a blackened canvas, as if the portrait had been burned away from within. Halfway through dessert, a suspiciously red custard. Jake nudged me. "The cellar door," he mouthed, nodding toward a narrow corridor. There, barely visible in the shadows, stood a wrought iron door with an oversized padlock. Something scratched at it from the other side. Back in our room, We tried to sleep. Then creaked and settled like a living thing. Around midnight, the whispers started, not from the hallway, but from inside the walls themselves. French words I barely understood, spoken in tones that made my skin prickle. Then came the footsteps, not the light scampering of rats, but something heavier, something that paused outside each door before moving on. When they stopped outside ours, the doorknob rattled. Morning brought no relief. The cellar door stood ajar when we passed it at breakfast, the padlock lying in pieces on the floor. Lefebvre was nowhere to be seen. As our repaired bus pulled away, I watched the inn recede in the rearview mirror. Just before the trees swallowed it from view, I swear I saw a face appear in the attic window, pale, grinning, and far too familiar. 3 months later, Jake emailed me a scanned newspaper article from 1923. It showed Le Relais Ubly in its prime. The staff lined up proudly out front. Near the back stood a young bellhop who looked exactly like Lefebvre. The accompanying article mentioned the inn's famous wine cellar and the 13 guests who had disappeared there one autumn weekend. Their names matched the initials carved into our headboards. When I didn't live in New York City, I often traveled long distances by car. I once ended up in this small Delaware town called Milford. I had plans nearby in a place called Rehoboth Beach, which was about 45 minutes to an hour away. I had originally planned to leave the next morning, but to avoid waking up early, I chose to drive out after work instead. I left around the time I normally clock out and made the long drive that same night. It took a little over 5 hours altogether. Since I wasn't going to be there long, I booked a motel, something I often do when traveling, so I'm used to it. I messaged the guy ahead of time asking if I could rent his $50 place, which looked decent in the photos. From the start, the guy gave off weird vibes, and it took a few messages back and forth before I was able to lock it in. He told me his dad would be dropping the key off, and also mentioned the kitchen had a lot of tropical plants he couldn't remove on short notice. Alright, whatever. I just needed a place to sleep for a few hours. Then I'd be gone first thing. I got there sometime around late night. Not sure how many of you have been to Milford, but it's basically the middle of nowhere. The guy's place was inside a tiny gated community with maybe 15 to 20 homes, all of it pitch black. I pulled up and grabbed the same items I always bring: duffel bag, backpack, jacket, and a backup jacket. I punched in the key code, opened the lockbox, and turned the key, which echoed loudly in the quiet. You know that gut feeling that tells you something is off, and maybe you shouldn't be there? Yeah, that was hitting me hard. I dropped my stuff on a recliner in front of me. And yep, plenty of tropical plants in the kitchen, just as promised. I checked the place out. It had a decent-sized living room. First bedroom, covered in dolls from the 1950s. A twin mattress on the floor, no frame, no sheets, just sitting there. Okay, skip that room. Next room, nutcracker figures everywhere. One sheet on the bed, no pillows. I went to flip the light switch. Turns out, there was no light at all. The switch didn't control anything. Alright, scratch that room too. The couch would have to do. Even though I felt weird about it, I told myself I could make it through just one night. I was hungry, so I went to the only nearby place still open, grabbed some pizza bites and a peach Snapple. Classy, I know. I felt so uneasy that I set up my GoPro, something I usually travel with, before I left. When I got back, first thing I did was check if anything had moved. Everything looked exactly the same. That gave me a little relief. I grabbed the GoPro, took out the SD card, and popped it into my laptop. I still have the footage somewhere. I wish I could show you. The place looked like the kind of spot you'd spend your final moments in. But as expected, the footage didn't show anything. By then it was really late, and I was exhausted from the day's work and the long drive, so I planned to crash on the tiny couch. The apartment had this tiny 19-inch TV, but no power cable, and the wall outlet was just far enough that my phone couldn't charge while I used it. Not that it would have helped, since I had Sprint, and no signal at all out there. I kept the lights on because, yeah, even grown adults like some comfort when things feel off. After lying there for what felt like an hour, I couldn't fall asleep, so I had to use the bathroom. I got up and sat in this weird, dimly lit neon yellow bathroom with a shower that didn't even have a curtain. Let me pause to say, the kitchen had faux hardwood floors, the kind that screech loudly if you drag a chair across them. That detail's important later. Anyway, there I was, doing my business, reading the label on a bottle because my phone was charging outside. Not that it mattered, since I had no service anyway. While sitting there, I suddenly heard the unmistakable sound of a chair sliding slowly across the hardwood kitchen floor. That high-pitched screech, just long enough to suggest someone sitting down. I nearly threw up my heart. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get worse, I heard fingers tapping, slowly at first, on what I assumed was the wooden table. Tapping getting faster, like someone waiting, impatient. I froze. I was in disbelief. Good thing I was already sitting on the toilet. I whispered to myself over and over again, I'm so messed up. I sat there for what must have been a few minutes, trying to decide what to do. The tapping eventually stopped, but I knew I couldn't stay in the bathroom forever. Whoever was out there had to know I was in here. So I told myself, forget it. I'd rather go out swinging than sit there shaking. I grabbed the Bowie knife I always keep in my travel backpack. If someone was there, I figured they weren't there to talk about their day. I burst out the door, ready to confront whoever it was. And nothing. Nobody. No signs of anyone at all. Even the chairs hadn't moved. I didn't stick around to find out anything else. I packed my stuff up like the place was on fire, got into my car, and drove straight to a hotel farther away. When I got there, I told the guy at the desk everything. He let me check in early. A king-sized bed, even though my original room wasn't supposed to be ready yet.